Have you ever noticed how two people can experience the exact same event and walk away with completely different stories? You step outside, the air is cold. One person wraps their coat tighter, cursing the wind, perceiving the chill as an assault, a reason to retreat. Another person steps into that same wind and feels its bracing energy, a reminder of the clean, stark power of the season. They open their stride, ready for the day. The wind is just moving air. The cold is just the absence of heat. The reality isn't the wind. The reality is the person experiencing it. We live inside the silent theater of our own skulls. A projector is always running, streaming the light of consciousness through the film of our memories, emotions, and beliefs. This projects the grand hologram we call here and now. We often think of our behavior as a series of conscious choices, but so often, the captain of our ship is asleep. The ship isn't steered by rational decisions, but by the deep, silent currents of our subconscious, our convictions about what is safe, what is possible, and what we deserve. Perception hardens into destiny. Our bodies even become monuments to these invisible beliefs. Look at the posture of someone who feels, deep down, that they are an imposition on the world. Their spine declares it. They take up less space, walking softly as if to apologize for their own footsteps. This isn't just a physical habit, it's a habit of being. Their perception of themselves dictates the tension in their shoulders and the shallowness of their breath. And the world, reading this physical language, tends to treat them exactly as they expect to be treated, overlooked, interrupted, confirming their own quiet hypothesis. Contrast this with the architecture of aggression. There's a specific lens that highlights scarcity and hierarchy. Through this lens, a casual glance isn't casual. It's a challenge. Silence isn't peaceful. It's a tactical void. This person acts not out of malice, but out of a terrified necessity. They strike first because their perception has populated the room with potential enemies. They dominate conversations because they believe that to pause is to be erased. They build a fortress of hostility to keep out a world they have painted as dangerous, never realizing the fortress itself is what draws the siege. We are mirrors, reflecting mirrors. My behavior, born from my perception, becomes the stimulus for your perception. This shapes your behavior, which then feeds back into my perception. We are locked in a dance of mutual creation. If I approach you with a closed fist, I teach you to see me as a threat. You raise your guard, which confirms my belief that the world is hostile. But if I approach you with an open hand, I disrupt the pattern. I invite you to perceive a different possibility. I change the input data for your brain. This is how the world changes, not by magic, but by the relentless contagion of perception-shifting behavior. Nowhere is this more tragic than in the theater of love. Intimacy is, at its core, a collision of perceptions. We don't just fall in love with a person. We fall in love with a hologram, a projection of our needs, our unfinished histories, and our ideals, all superimposed onto a stranger. For a while, the chemical rush sustains this illusion. But eventually, the real person moves. They act in a way that contradicts the script we've written for them. They are selfish, or boring, or frightened. The crisis in a relationship is rarely a crisis of action. It's a crisis of interpretation. When a partner withdraws, one mind might perceive it as abandonment, triggering the ancient panic of a child left alone. The behavior that follows, clinging, accusing, demanding reassurance, isn't a response to the partner's need for space, but to the terrifying internal narrative of "I am unlovable." Another mind might see the same withdrawal as a moment of autonomy, a peaceful pause. The behavior that follows is patience. The action was identical, but the conflict that follows is entirely manufactured by the meaning assigned to the silence. We often destroy relationships because we can't bear to let the other person be real. We punish them for failing to be the character we cast. And what about ambition? What drives the frantic accumulation of wealth, status, and acclaim? It's often a perceptual deficit, a hole in the soul, that looks at the present moment and sees it as not enough. The ambitious mind is often running away from a stillness it finds unbearable. It perceives the future as the place where salvation lives. When I have the title, then I will be valid. When I get the house, then I will be safe. This perception turns life into a waiting room. It degrades the present into a mere means to an end. We sacrifice our health and our families to reach a horizon that retreats as we approach. The tragedy of the rat race isn't the effort. It's the illusion that the prize will somehow change the perceiver. We think the accolade will rewrite our internal code, but the person who feels like a fraud will feel like a fraud in a corner office, just as they did in a cubicle. They'll just have a better view for their anxiety. Imposter syndrome is a perfect example at S, a glitch in perception where the internal self-image refuses to update. No matter the external evidence, you can conquer the world and still feel like a frightened child in big clothes, all because you're perceiving yourself through the fossilized lens of the past. But this is a practice, not a destination. The mind is restless. It is always scanning, always predicting, trying to keep us safe by keeping us small. It will constantly try to pull us back into the familiar grooves of the past. The shadows will lengthen again. The fear will whisper that the world is dark and sharp. And in those moments, the most powerful thing we can do is to remember that we are wearing glasses. We can take them off. We can clean them. We can even try on a different pair. We are the architects of our own experience, but we often live like tenants, complaining about the drafty windows we ourselves installed. To understand the power of perception is to take up the architect's tools. It is to realize that while we can't always control the raw data, the events, the tragedies, the accidents of fate, we have immense power over how that data is processed. We decide what it means. We decide how it fits into our story. And in that invisible, silent microsecond of cognitive processing, the future is born. The hand that holds the pen, the hand that shapes the clay of the moment, is guided not by muscle, but by the dream. It seeks to make the world match the map we hold in our minds. So the question is, what map are you using? And are you willing to draw a new one? These lenses are polished by the societies we inhabit. We are social animals, and our survival once depended on the group's acceptance. Therefore, we have evolved a hypersensitivity to the social gaze. We modify our behavior not based on what we want, but on how we perceive others will perceive us. This is the prison of conformity. We stifle our laughter, we hide our tears, we dress in costumes that chafe, we speak in borrowed platitudes, all to avoid the perceived threat of judgment. We become actors on a stage, performing for an audience that is mostly largely ignoring us, occupied with their own performances. Consider the immense energy consumed by the management of this persona. The mask, we construct a version of ourselves that is acceptable, competent, and invulnerable. We curate our lives on digital screens, filtering out the gray days, the failures, the messy uncertainty. We present a highlight reel, and in doing so, we begin to believe that everyone else is living a highlight reel while we are trudging through the out. This comparison is a poison of perception. It breeds envy, bitterness, and a sense of profound isolation. We look at the smiling face of a stranger and perceive a life of unbroken happiness, not realizing we are looking at a billboard, not a diary. We judge our insides by other people's outsides. This distortion creates a behavior of hiding. We stop sharing our true thoughts because we perceive them as weird or shameful. We stop taking risks because we perceive failure as a death sentence for our reputation. We live smaller, quieter, grayer lives, hemmed in not by actual bars, but by the imaginary lines drawn by our fear of what they might think. But deeper still, beneath the social mask and the romantic projection, lies the fundamental perception of time and mortality. How we behave is inextricably linked to how we perceive our own The person who perceives death as a terrifying abyss, a thief in the night, lives in a state of low-grade contraction. They cling to the known, they hoard, they resist change. They build walls of safety that ultimately become walls of imprisonment. Their behavior is defined by avoidance. Conversely, the person who perceives death as the natural frame that gives the picture its beauty, who understands that the fragility of life is what grants it value, behaves with a different urgency. They forgive more quickly. They savor the taste of the coffee. They speak the truth because they know there is no time for lies. The Stoics spoke of memento mori, remember, you will die, not to induce despair, but to clarify perception. When the lens is cleaned by the awareness of mortality, the trivial insults of the day lose their sting. The traffic jam, the spilled milk, the awkward comment, they are perceived in their proper scale, which is microscopic. The behavior shifts from reactivity to presence. Yet, shifting this perception is the hardest labor of the human experience. We are creatures of pattern. The neural pathways of our brains are like riverbeds. Once the water of thought and reaction has flowed down a certain channel for years, it deepens the groove. It becomes the path of least resistance. To perceive the world differently is to force the water to flow uphill. It requires a disruption of the automatic. This is where the concept of identity becomes both a comfort and a cage. We tell ourselves, I am an anxious person, or I am short-tempered, or I am not creative. We speak these things as if they are biological facts, like blood type or eye color, but they are largely ossified perceptions. They are memories of past behaviors that we have calcified into a noun. By labeling ourselves, we grant ourselves permission to repeat the behavior. I yelled because I am short-tempered. No, you yelled because you felt a sensation of pressure and interpreted it as a need to explode. And you have practiced that interpretation 1,000 times. The label excuses the lack of consciousness. Breaking this cycle requires a kind of violence against one's own ego. It demands that we stand on the precipice of a moment and refuse to jump into the familiar abyss. When the wave of anger rises, instead of riding it into a shout, we simply watch it. We perceive the heat in the chest, the tightness in the throat, but we strip away the narrative that says, "He disrespected me." We stay with the raw sensation. We separate the physics of the emotion from the story of the emotion. In that gap, that terrified, silent gap between the trigger and the reaction, freedom lives. It is a strange, uncomfortable freedom. It feels like falling. Without the familiar crutch of our habitual reactions, we feel naked. If I don't yell, who am I? If I don't withdraw, am I safe? If I don't strive for the next achievement, do I exist? The dismantling of perception is a dismantling of the self we thought we knew. This is the dark night of the soul. It is the point where the old maps no longer work, but the new ones have not yet been drawn. We look at the world and it seems alien. The symbols have lost their meaning. The money looks like paper. The status looks like a game. The conflicts look like madness. We are untethered, but it is here, in this groundless state, that true compassion begins to take root. When we realize how deeply we have been enslaved by our own distorted perceptions, we look at others and see the same chains. We see the tyrant not as a monster, but as a frightened consciousness trapped in a hallucination of power. We see the addict not as a failure, but as a mind desperately trying to adjust the filters of a painful reality. We see the judgment of the parent, the coldness of the lover, the rudeness of the stranger, and we recognize the machinery at work. We move from judgment to curiosity. What must they be seeing, we ask, to make them act this way? This shift does not excuse behavior harm. It's still harm, but it changes our response to it. We stop taking the world personally. We stop absorbing the poison. We become like the sky, allowing the storms of others to pass through without altering our nature. And slowly, tentatively, we begin to experiment with new perceptions. We try on the lens of gratitude, not as a platitude, but as a discipline. We force the mind to scan the environment for what is working, for what is beautiful, for what is sustaining. At first, it feels artificial. The brain resists. It wants to scan for threats, but with repetition, the channel deepens. We begin to see the green of the trees more than the gray of the pavement. We begin to see the kindness of the stranger more than the indifference. And because we see it, we respond to it. We smile, we open, and the world, mirroring our new posture, softens. We begin to play with the narrative of identity. What if I am not broken? What if I am simply healing? What if I am not shy, but observant? We rewrite the captions of our own history. We look back at the traumas of the past, and, instead of seeing them as evidence of our victimization, we try to perceive them as the fire that forged our resilience. The facts do not change. The abuse happened, the loss was real. But the meaning changes, and when the meaning changes, the future changes. The survivor walks differently than the victim. The student walks differently than the failure. We realize then that reality is not something we endure, but something we negotiate. It is a collaborative act between the universe and the nervous system. We possess a terrifying power, the power to curate the universe. As we stand in the center of this realization, the noise of the world seems to drop to a hum. The frantic need to control outcomes fades, replaced by a focus on controlling the aperture. We understand that we cannot stop the rain, but we can choose whether to perceive it as a gloomy inconvenience or a nourishing necessity. We cannot stop the passage of time, but we can choose to perceive it as a tragedy or a journey. This is the dawn of agency. It is the waking up of the architect. We begin to build with intention. We choose the materials of our attention with care. We guard the gates of the mind. We become skeptical of our own certainties. When a dark thought enters, dragging with it the heavy chains of fear, we do not simply believe it, we interrogate it. Is this true? Is this helpful? Is this me? Or is this the echo of an old wound? The inner monologue shifts from a tyrant to a guide. The hostility turns to hospitality. We welcome the emotions, but we do not let them run the house. And as this internal work proceeds, the external world begins to rearrange itself. The rigid categories of good and bad, friend and enemy, success and failure begin to dissolve into a fluid spectrum of experience. We find we can sit with uncertainty without reaching for the panic button. We can sit with silence without reaching for the distraction. We can look into the face of another human being and see, for a fleeting moment, the same consciousness looking back at us, behind the different mask, behind the different history. The separation collapses. We breathe. The air enters the lungs, objective and cool. The heart beats, a rhythm older than thought. We are here, and for the first time, we are not just watching the movie. We are aware of the light that makes it possible. The screen is vast. The potential is infinite. And the next moment, the next choice, the next perception is rising from the void, waiting to be shaped, waiting to become the truth we live. This is the precipice of the new reality. It is not found in the seismic shifts of geography or the dramatic overturning of circumstances. We often believe that to change our lives, we must change the scenery. We dream of the new city, the new partner, the new career, convinced that a different backdrop will compel a different performance. But if the lens remains cracked, the new landscape will be rendered with the same distortions. The shadows will fall in the same places. The anxiety will find new objects to latch onto, like a vine seeking a trellis. True transformation is quieter. It is tectonic, taking place deep beneath the surface of the persona. It is the realization that the world we struggle against is largely a world we have projected. When this understanding settles into the marrow, the war with reality ends. We stop trying to smooth the waves and begin to learn how to sail. This is the shift from resistance to integration. Resistance is the friction caused by the distance between what we perceive and what we demand. We demand that the moment be happy when it is sad. We demand that the stranger be kind when they are rude. We demand certainty in a universe woven from chaos. This demand creates the suffering. The pain, the physical sensation of loss, or injury, or rejection is inevitable. It is the cost of having a nervous system, but the suffering, the story that says this shouldn't be happening, this is unfair, this will never end, that is optional. That is a product of perception. When we drop the resistance, when we simply perceive the pain without the narrative of victimization, the pain changes texture. It becomes a pure sensation, intense perhaps, but manageable. It flows. It is no longer a solid wall, but a river moving through us. We become the riverbed, enduring, holding, but not obstructing. This is the birth of true resilience. Resilience is often mistaken for hardness, for an emotional callus that deflects the blow. But the rigid break, the soft absorbed resilience is the flexibility of perception. It is the ability to look at a catastrophe and, after the initial shock, to begin to rotate the prism, to ask, what does this make possible? Who does this require me to become? It is the alchemical power to turn the lead of adversity into the gold of wisdom. Not by magic, but by a rigorous reframing of meaning. The event remains the same. The loss is still a loss. But the survivor perceives the loss as a pruning, a clearing of space for new growth, while the victim perceives it as a theft. As we deepen this practice, the boundaries of the self begin to soften. We have spent lifetimes constructing a fortress of identity. I am this, I am not that, building walls to separate me from you, but perception, when clarified, reveals the porosity of these walls. We begin to see that our thoughts are not unique to us. They are the wind blowing through the collective consciousness. Our fears are the ancient fears of the species. Our desires are the biochemical mandates of life itself. We are not isolated islands. We are waves in the same ocean. This realization transforms our behavior toward others. Empathy ceases to be a moral obligation and becomes a perceptual necessity. When we look at the angry person, we no longer see a villain, we see a mirror. We see the same machinery of fear and defense that operates within us, only currently tuned to a different frequency. We see the child hiding behind the armor of the adult. This perception disarms us. We cannot hate what we understand. The clenched fist relaxes not because we are forcing ourselves to be good, but because the perception of threat has evaporated. There is no one to fight. There is only another aspect of the struggle to be human. And so, the behavior of compassion arises naturally, effortlessly, like heat radiating from a fire. It is no longer a transaction, I will be nice to you, so you will be nice to me. It is an expression of a shared reality. We help the other because, in a very real perceptual sense, there is no other. There is only the continuous fabric of life. And to heal a tear in the fabric anywhere is to heal it everywhere. This is the spiritual dimension of perception. It is the movement from the egoic view, which places the self at the center of the universe, around which all events orbit, to the systemic view, which sees the self as a participant in a vast, unfolding ecology. From this vantage point, the desperate need for control falls away. We realize the absurdity of trying to micromanage the infinite variables of existence. We surrender. Surrender, in this context, is not defeat. It is not throwing up our hands in despair. It is the conscious decision to align our will with the flow of reality. It is the athlete entering the zone, where thought ceases and action becomes fluid. In the zone, the separation between the doer and the deed vanishes. The dancer becomes the dance. This state is accessible to us all, not just in moments of high performance, but in the mundane rhythm of the day. It requires only that we drop the perceptual filter of judgment. When we wash the dishes, we simply wash the dishes. We do not perceive it as a chore, a waste of time, a barrier to something better. We feel the water. We see the light on the bubbles. We are fully present, and in that presence, the mundane becomes sacred. The boredom dissolves, because boredom is simply the perception that meaning is missing. When we bring the full weight of our attention to the moment, meaning returns. This brings us to the ultimate function of the mind, the creation of time. We perceive time as a linear river, carrying us helplessly from the cradle to the grave. We suffer from the scarcity of it. We rush, we mourn the past, and mortgage the present for the future. But time, too, is a construct of perception. The past exists only as memory traces firing in the present. The future exists only as neural predictions firing in the present. There is only, ever, this moment. The now is the only place where life touches us. When perception anchors itself in the now, the anxiety of time creates a ceasefire. We are no longer running out of time. We are simply moving through it. The urgency transforms into intensity. We see the impermanence of all things, the flower that blooms and fades, the cloud shifting, the aging of our own bodies, not as a tragedy, but as the very condition of beauty. A sunset is beautiful, precisely because it is fleeing. A melody is sweet because it resolves into silence. If they lasted forever, we would cease to see them. Impermanence is the contrast fluid that makes existence visible. Accepting this transience changes how we hold the world. We hold it loosely. We love without clutching. We aspire without addiction. We understand that everything we perceive is a loan from the void, destined to return. This creates a profound behavioral shift, a lightness of being. We stop dragging the heavy luggage of mind, and forever, we walk through the world like travelers, appreciating the inn, but knowing we cannot stay. And in this lightness, the fear of death, the ultimate perceptual shadow, begins to thin. If we are not the rigid story of the ego, but the awareness that witnesses the story, then what dies? The story ends. The screen goes black, but the awareness, that remains a mystery. We begin to suspect that we are not the lamp, but the electricity. The bulb may shatter, but the current is undiminished. This intimation, however faint, grants a courage that cannot be taken away. We are free to live boldly because we are no longer defending a fortress that is destined to fall. We are simply experiencing the ride. It is no longer the master, dictating a reality of fear and separation. It is the servant. It is a magnificent tool for navigating the physical plane, for solving problems, for communicating, for creating art. We use the knife of